Hey everyone, Tim Wright here. I am the senior pastor of Community of Grace Lutheran Church in Peoria, Arizona. But for purposes today, I am also the co-host of the Wonder of Parenting podcast, a brain science approach to parenting, along with my good friend, Dr. Michael Gurian, who is a New York Times bestselling author, also the brains behind the brain science approach to parenting. And Michael, it's good to have you with us up there in Spokane. How are things up there?
Thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah, it's 80 degrees today, which for us is,
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah.
Cooler for you guys, but perfect for us.
We get it in the mornings, maybe. So we are here with our good friend, Dr. Warren Stewart. And Warren is the senior pastor of First Institutional Baptist Church in downtown Phoenix. And probably his greatest claim to fame is he's a great man. He's a dad. He's a husband. But he's also been a strong advocate and supporter here in our community for African-American issues. And we are the only state, I believe, right, Warren, in the country that actually, as a state, voted to make legal a Martin Luther King holiday. And it was Dr. Warren who was one of the people who spearheaded that event. So it's a pretty big deal. And we're really honored to have you with us today.
I'm honored to be here with you all.
Yes. We have been talking a lot in our country these last several weeks about racism. And so it's good that we focus on that and specifically how that affects our African-American boys. Before we talk about that, though, we are taping this on Juneteenth. And we did not plan that. I wish we could say we planned that, but we've been trying to set something to get up for 3 weeks. It happened to be today. And Warren, I have to admit to you, this has not been on my radar at all. And I don't remember ever learning about it in school. Of course, there's a lot of history that I didn't learn in school, and I've been spending the last 3 weeks really getting caught up.
Sure.
What does Juneteenth mean to you today?
All right. Glad you asked, and a great question. And Providence had us to have this recorded on Juneteenth. I just wrote a letter to our sick and shut-ins. I write a letter every week to them. And so the focus was on Juneteenth this week. And I mentioned that when I was a little boy growing up in Kansas, I never knew about Juneteenth. I went to college in Dallas, Texas, never really heard about Juneteenth. Went to seminary in New York City, never heard about it. But when I came to Arizona in 1977 to pastor this church, the annual Juneteenth celebration was a big deal 3 blocks from First Institutional Baptist Church in Eastlake Park, which is a historic African-American park. And Juneteenth is the June 19th, 1865, is when the slaves in Texas first heard about the Emancipation Proclamation that was declared by Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863. So they had been slaves for 2.5 years, not knowing they were free.
Yeah. And
so the next year, 1866, was the first celebration of Juneteenth, because it was on June 19th, 1865, that the slaves in Texas found out that they were free. And so with all of the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and with the president choosing to have his first campaign rally in Tulsa on Juneteenth weekend, it's at the forefront of all media. I even heard something from BBC today. They're talking about it in Europe.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Well, is it correct to say Happy Juneteenth?
It is.
Okay.
Happy Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth
To all of us.
Thank you.
Now, what makes our panel really interesting is we've got Dr. Warren Stewart here, who is obviously an African-American man. And we've got Michael Gurian, who is a Jewish man who has experienced anti-Semitism in his life. And then we've got me. I'm a white guy who grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. And like many white people in our culture today, have been trying to get caught up in terms of Black history, who one of my Black friends says is not Black history, it's our history. And I loved that. I thought that was pertinent. But we're going to talk specifically about boys. It has been a passion that Michael and I have had for years. I'm going to let Michael talk about this in a moment. But the way that the three of us connected was we did a Helping Boys Thrive Summit in Phoenix, Arizona at Warren's church. They were kind enough to open up their church. And at the risk of sounding a little egotistical, Michael and I were brilliant. I mean, everything we said was spot on. And then Warren comes in for 5 minutes. And he brings the roof down on the place. And so whatever egos that Michael and I had, gone after that, because Warren just came in and with such passion spoke about African-American boys. And so we're going to talk about that today. That's how we all became friends. So Michael, let's start with broad strokes first. Why are we talking about boys today? What is it about boys that we in America have been missing or that we need to know about? And then we're going to go deeper into the challenges that our African-American boys face.
Well, that's a big question. Boys. I mean, I don't know how to, I'm always asked that question, and it's always whatever comes to my mind at that moment, because it's so massive. I think I think what in the time where, with the protests now, what I see is a reinvigoration of the concept that males are somewhat abandoned in American culture and actually in Western culture, even though we have the illusion, because of very rich and very powerful people who are at the top, almost all of whom are male, probably 90% are male. We have the illusion that males are doing very well, but I would put it at around 1 billion males in the world are having a lot of trouble. And in the U.S., it's definitely in the tens of millions. When we look at unemployment, when we look at lack of purpose, when we look at video game addiction, porn addiction, school to prison pipeline, preschool to prison pipeline. When we look at all these things, and then we add mental illness rates, suicide rates, males are in significant trouble, and we have kind of abandoned them to two concepts. One is they're doing fine because we see these guys on TV who are doing fine. And the other is if they aren't doing well, it's because they're defective and patriarchal. And we have a number of obviously buzzwords for that. Too much masculinity, whatever is politically correct at that moment. And what we're not understanding is that these are fragile human beings who really need our help. And we've taken away a lot of their scaffolding as males. And then when we expand that into, and I'll pass the baton to Pastor Stewart, but when we expand that research into boys of color, what we see, and then in the programming we do in Title I communities and with children of color, we see that the problem for boys, which is a problem in all these institutions, in schools, even in churches, we've discussed it, in synagogues, they drop out, across the board. Those problems then get amplified when we add color in, and we add, neighborhood, zip code, demographics, and of course today boys of color. Then the basic issues boys face then become amplified. And so of course I'll pass that to Pastor Stewart.
Yeah, before I talk to Warren a bit, Michael, you've been at the forefront of this for years. Your book, The Wonder Boys, was really one of the first to identify that something wasn't right with our boys. We had put so much effort into getting our girls caught up, and we still have work to do. But in the process, we sort of left our boys behind. And now you've got your book out, Saving Our Sons. We know that one of the key issues with our boys is they're falling behind. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them are falling behind in education. And that's true of boys, period, not just certain segments of boys. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, this boys, period. When we talk about boys of color, we're taking a group and we're seeing an amplification of a problem that exists for boys across the board. In schools, boys make up 70% of the D's and F's, and they only make up 40% of the A's. And that's, boys of all colors. But again, it gets amplified based on demographics and group. And then in terms of test scores, boys are behind girls in test scores, mainly because their literacy scores are so far behind. And even with the STEM gap that we do talk a lot about, and which is important. I mean, I have 2 daughters, so the girls in STEM gap is important for sure. But it's a 2 to 3 point gap, whereas the male literacy gap is a 10-point gap.
Wow.
So it's 3 times higher, that gap. And so across the board in education, we see these problems. And luckily what we have come to understand over the last 30 years, and especially the last 25 years of being in title communities and doing training and pilots, what we've come to understand is that the teachers and the people are really smart. If they are provided with training and with understanding of how the male brain works, and then add on cultural responsiveness, of course, you put that together and train these wonderful teachers, they start closing some of these achievement gaps. So the great thing is we understand a lot of the problems and we understand the solutions. Some of the solutions.
Yeah. So Warren, as Michael said, boys across the spectrum are experiencing challenges, but when it comes to specifically today, our African-American sons, there are some real deep challenges. So what do you want to say to us about what your experience has been as a father to sons, as a boy growing up, and what you're seeing in your community right now when it comes to our boys in the 21st century?
America, get your knee off the neck of our Black boys, our boys of color. You've had it on their necks for 400 years now, and it's time for you to get your knee off of our necks. From the introduction of slavery back in 1619 to this land, African males were emasculated. They were treated as animals. They were treated as savages, as property. They were forced not to even speak their language. They had to get permission to get married to a female slave. I mean, America, systemic racism still has its knee pressing down, and you have Black boys saying, we can't breathe, we can't breathe. And that is, with all of the recent shootings of Black males primarily by police officers, and those are the ones that we caught on video. We don't know about the ones that have not been caught on video. Black boys are endangered species. I have a father of 5 sons. I have, about 7 or 8 grandsons. And I have had to talk with my boys about racism, about how people will treat you as second class, as no class, as lower class. We've had to talk about when you get stopped by the police, how you have to say yes sir, no sir, be very polite, or else you could not come home alive. But we are confronted with it every day. I'll give you a story. When I was in community college in Coffeyville, Kansas, I had a teacher, a white teacher from Mississippi, and it was a math class, and it was a computerized math class. And when it came to the finals, I aced all of the tests. And when he had my grade, he said, "This is impossible. You can't do this. This is impossible." And I just looked at him. I said, the computer graded my test scores. And he said, this is impossible. I remember I told my grandfather, who was probably in his late 60s or early 70s then, and he said, "Do you need me to come over there and straighten that man out from Mississippi?" But the very fact that this white Mississippi instructor felt that a Black male could not ace a computerized math test. Mm-hmm. So I had to prove myself against his test that I aced.
Right. So tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you face. It was your son actually who sort of introduced me to this concept of the school to prison pipeline. Talk a bit about that and some of the underlying causes of that as you see it.
Well, it has been taught that by 3rd grade, the penal system can look at the test scores, the grade levels, the grades of males in elementary school to determine how many beds they're going to need in the prison. I don't know if that's myth. I don't know if that's factual, but that is the story out there. So it starts young. Now, let me say this. Part of the problem is 60 to 70% of African-American boys live in a single-parent home where the mother is only present.
Right.
And that contributes significantly to the self-esteem, to the understanding of what it means to be a male. So Black boys have to be reared, not just dealing with how it's difficult for boys, as Michael has said, for all boys, but they have to, how can I be successful, not only when the society lowers its expectations of me, but when I'm a Black and I have to prove my equalness, my maleness. I have to prove that I am just as significant and important as white boys. And I have to prove that to the system virtually every day that I get up. When I walk into a corner store, when I go to the grocery store, people are watching me. If two Black teenagers come in, the clerks begin to watch. They go on alert. And so these are things that young Black boys learn at an early age, and it's important for Black men to be present in their life. I came from a single parent home. My father lived in Kansas City, 127 miles away. He denied that he was my father when I was born until he saw me. He couldn't deny me anymore. But so I came up in a single parent home, and I had some challenges because of it. I used to stutter severely until I became probably 19 or 20. But my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, my mother and I stayed in their home most of my young life. And I had a grandmother and a grandfather. And I called my grandfather daddy, my grandmother mama, because my mother called her mama. And so that helped me to escape. But even with them, I went through juvenile delinquency. I was shot for breaking in a house at age 14. I was known as the town hoodlum. But men, even in my little church there, came alongside me when I became a juvenile delinquent, and they said, "You're more than what you are acting like now." And so they saved me.
Yeah. Michael, we've talked a lot about that. Boys, generally speaking, how much they need a dad. Of course, we're recording on Father's Day weekend. What has been some of the things that you have learned about the importance of men in the lives of our boys?
Yeah, well, I thank you for your story, and it's absolutely crucial. And part of what we're battling in terms of boyhood in America, and then, almost twofold when we add Black boyhood in America, we're battling the concept that maleness and males, it's inherently defective. And we have to realize, as that concept has to some extent taken over a lot of the academic conversation, a lot of the media conversation, the constant males are defective, masculinity is toxic, masculinity is defective. As that happens, it's hard for males to see themselves really for who we need them to be, which is we need them to be strong fathers, we need them to be caring fathers, we need them to be, and grandfathers, right? We need them to take these kids under their wing, and especially in the age of 10 to 20. That's when developmentally the father or male role model is absolutely crucial, and we need a number of them. Birth to 10, it would be great to have them. I would argue is still essential, but a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and mom and a number of women around that boy, and then his peers and all that, he gets raised up. I mean, you can kind of at 4 and 5 and 6. We don't see the emergency yet, generally, developmentally, because he's getting so much attachment and so much help. We would like to see father there. That would be optimal. But the real problem is between 10 and 20. When males are between 10 and 20 and puberty starts hitting, and they start getting just developmentally, biologically, and socially, they start getting higher risk, more impulse that they're not controlling. They need help with self-regulation. They need help with resilience. They need help with motivation. They need help with following through in school. They need help with what's right and what's wrong, because they're constantly challenging at 13, 14, 15. What is the definition of right and wrong? I want to do that. I think it might be right, but they need males to be saying to them, yeah, tried that, that's wrong, you don't do that, et cetera. I mean, obviously we all know what I mean. So especially 10 to 20 is when these young guys need this help from males. And as long as we devalue and demonize, males and masculinity, I think that we're going to have real problems. And we're going to end up creating a society which we have, and which, as you, Pastor Stewart, have said, is especially true in Black communities, where it's very, very much a maternal society, and it doesn't devalue mom. Obviously, moms are essential and incredible, but it's not enough. And I know very few single moms of any race who would say they think it's enough to be a single mom of 3 sons, who are 12, 13, and 14. I mean, the race on that one, of course, as you know, it doesn't matter. It's human. They need this help, and men need to be doing it. But we've created a society in which males are kind of abandoned and alienated, and we don't realize it because there are a lot of intact families. So well, look, that's an intact family, and look, that dad's doing a great job. Why aren't they all? And then, of course, in inner cities and in under-resourced communities, the ability of males to bond in the nuclear family unit, and then to have support from the extended family around them to be able to bond, to find employment, that just is a double down. And so we are, you're right, Pastor, we're going to have to do it from the outside in with Black communities, right? Where we got to get police reform. We got to do that. We got to get rid of over incarceration and really train judges in what males are doing and what Black males are doing. And that a lot of that does not have to be prison, right? We have to do all of that. And at the same time, inside the communities, we've got to incentivize education and fathering. And if you, Pastor, know the magic formula for that, tell us, because we've all been battling for that for decades, and it's just so small, the increments of success. It's painful.
So Warren, as you look at the boys in your own family, your community, what is your hope for our African American sons, and how do we get there? What are a few things that will help us get there?
Well, certainly as a pastor, I believe our hope is in God and raising God-fearing sons in God-fearing homes, whether it's a single-parent home with a mother or a two-parent home, or in my situation, grandparents and a parent. So that's where we begin, but we have to break the cycle of this. And I blame a lot of it on systemic racism, but I blame it on the sexual revolution, where just free sex and, I go with this man, I date this woman for a while and another woman here. I mean, God had his intentions when he created a husband and wife, mother and father and children. And I don't think you can improve on that model for family. I mean, but I believe in non-traditional families, etc. But when it comes to Black boys, yes, the mother can do it, but the mothers are often immature and are in a generational cycle. So they're repeating what they saw their mother do, and the grandmother saw, and what they saw their grandmother do. And somewhere you have to break the cycle, and so that women have self-esteem that they are more than a bed partner. They're more than a baby producer, that they have a God-given assignment from creation to mother their children, boys and girls, and that the father has a role beyond impregnating someone.
Yes.
That's only the beginning. And if you impregnate someone, you need to be responsible for that person. I mean, these are biblical truths that work in society, and even if they're not biblical, they work in most human societies. But battling a lack of self-esteem for being Black as a boy, and then as a teenager, then as a young man, expected to get in trouble, expected to be in prison, expected to drop out of school, expected to have children by 3 or 4 different women. I mean, we have to break that cycle. And as I am prophetic to the powers that be, that I believe support, sustain systemic racist power structures, I'm prophetic to the Black men and women that I come in contact to be responsible, to be all they should be as men and women of color, and providing for their children. I hope that helped answer that question.
I was watching a new YouTube series. It features Emmanuel Acho, and he is an former NFL player, and he has been doing this new series. He's done 3 of them now, called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, and he's speaking to white people, trying to answer their questions about racism. And one of the things he said in one of the videos was, as a Black man, and now this is a successful Black football player, he says, whenever I go out, I have to be aware of the fact that I'm Black.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't go outside aware of the fact that I'm a white guy.
Yeah.
And so this is a conversation, of course, we spent about 30 minutes on, but this is something Michael's been talking about for over 30 years. And this is something the Black community has been working on for 400 some years.
Right.
But we seem to be in a Kairos moment, Warren, right?
I believe so. I was just talking to someone yesterday about this. I believe that the public murder, which I call an execution, unquote, of Mr. George Floyd, the fact that we saw him die. I mean, other incidents, we've seen the body on the street, we've seen the sheets over, but this time we heard him beg for his life. I can't breathe. We heard him call for his deceased mother. For those of us who work in pastorates, we know that many people, when they get ready to die, they call their deceased loved ones. They reach out to them. So he was dying and reaching out to his mother, and yet the police officer nonchalantly kept the pressure on his neck even after he was dead.
Yeah.
So I believe that the nation has suffered trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. I believe we are traumatized. And that's why I believe that God has allowed the killing of Mr. Floyd to usher in a Kairos moment when he intervenes, when he interrupts our schedules. All right, y'all need to get this. Y'all need to change this. This evil of systemic racism, especially against Black boys and men, has got to stop. And if you don't get it right this time, God forbid the next time something happens.
Right.
And my only concern to both of you and to those who are listening is that we waste this time rather than take it.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you on my end, I have spent more time watching and reading and listening than I've ever done before. And I know a lot of people have been joining me in that. And this is something where all of us, it doesn't matter what race we come from, doesn't matter the color of our skin, doesn't matter our gender. This is something we all work on together. Our boys are the future, they're the present, and we want to make sure that we're all doing what we can to help our boys succeed. And I thank you both very, very much. Michael, thank you as always. And
thank you, and thank you, Pastor.
Thank you for having us.
Warren, you're just such a good friend, and you're so passionate and articulate about this stuff. We appreciate you and all your leadership here in Phoenix. And let's roll up our sleeves. Let's get at it for our sons. How about it? Thank you, guys.